The champagne glass slipped from my trembling hand, shattering against the marble floor of my son's $15 million mansion. The sound echoed through the elegant Christmas Eve dinner party like a gunshot, but I barely noticed. I was too busy staring at my own son in complete bewilderment as he asked me the most confusing question I'd ever heard. "So, Dad, did you get your monthly allowance this time? The $12,000 should have hit your account 3 days ago." Allowance? What allowance? I'd never received a monthly allowance in my entire life. But as I stood there, mouth agape, watching the color drain from my daughter-in-law's face like she'd seen a ghost, I realized something devastating. That money, my money, had been going somewhere, just not to me. The way Sarah's champagne glass began trembling in her manicured hands told me everything I needed to know. For 3 years, while I'd been struggling to pay my personal bills and living off my dwindling savings, my own family had been stealing from me, right under my nose. During Christmas, the season of giving had become the season of taking, and I was about to discover just how deep this betrayal went. What happened next would destroy their perfect little charade and cost them everything they thought they'd stolen from me. But first, let me tell you how I built an empire, trusted my family with everything, and then watched them try to steal it all. My name is Robert Chen, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew everything about building something from nothing. I came to this country 45 years ago with $200 in my pocket and a head full of dreams. No connections, no safety net, no family wealth to fall back on, just determination and the absolute certainty that America rewarded hard work. I was right, but not in the way I expected. By the time I was 35, I'd built Chen Technologies into a multi-million-dollar software company. By 50, we were worth $500 million. By 65, when I decided to step back and let my son Marcus take the reins, our company was valued at $2.8 billion. Not bad for a kid who couldn't speak English when he got off the plane. Marcus was everything I dreamed of in a son. Ivy League educated, brilliant with numbers, charismatic in ways I never was. When I looked at him, I saw the American dream perfected. All the opportunities I'd fought for, handed to him on a silver platter, but earned through his own intelligence and drive. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, worked his way up through every department in our company, and proved himself worthy of the legacy I'd built. 2 years ago, I made the decision that would change everything. I stepped down as CEO, handed Marcus the keys to the kingdom, and transitioned into what I thought would be a peaceful retirement. The board loved him, the employees respected him, and our stock price soared under his leadership. I was so proud I could barely contain it. That's when he met Sarah. Sarah Martinez was stunning in that effortless way that only comes from generations of privilege. Tall, elegant, with an MBA from Wharton and a background in private wealth management. When Marcus brought her home for the first time, my late wife would have loved her. Sophisticated, intelligent, seemingly devoted to our son. They had a fairy tale wedding that cost more than most people's houses, and I was thrilled to welcome her into our family. But here's what I didn't know about fairy tales. Sometimes the princess is actually the villain. When I transitioned out of active leadership, I thought I was being responsible by setting up a reasonable monthly allowance for my personal expenses. $12,000 seemed modest for someone who'd built what I'd built. I instructed Marcus to handle the family finances, trusting him completely. After all, he was running a billion-dollar company. Managing his old man's spending money should have been simple. Except I never saw a penny of it. For 3 years, I lived off my personal savings, never questioning why that monthly payment never appeared in my accounts. I assumed there had been some banking error, or maybe Marcus was handling it differently than I had expected. I trusted my son implicitly. That trust was about to cost me $500,000 and nearly destroy the family I'd sacrificed everything to build. Christmas Eve at Marcus and Sarah's mansion was supposed to be perfect. The house was decorated like something out of a luxury magazine. 12-foot Christmas tree with imported ornaments, garlands that probably cost more than a car, and enough twinkling lights to power a small city. Sarah had hired a full catering staff, and the guest list read like a who's who of Seattle's business elite. I should have been proud. My son was living the life I'd always dreamed of giving him. But as I watched him and Sarah move through the crowd like royalty, something felt off. The jewelry she wore was new and expensive. The renovations to their house seemed endless. The private jet trips, the charity galas, the lifestyle that seemed to expand every month. Where was all this money coming from? Marcus had been drinking. Not drunk, but relaxed in that dangerous way that makes people say things they shouldn't. We were standing near the fireplace with several business partners when he casually dropped the question that would change everything. "Hey, Dad, did you get your allowance this month? I know Sarah has been handling the family accounts, but with the holidays, I wanted to make sure the $12,000 went through on schedule." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, my champagne glass suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. "What allowance, son? I've never received any monthly allowance." The silence that followed was deafening. Our guests looked confused, probably wondering if they'd missed some inside joke. But I watched Marcus's face transformed from casual confidence to dawning horror as he realized what he'd just revealed. And then I saw Sarah. She had been laughing with a group of women near the piano, but when she heard Marcus's words, her face went ghostly white. Her champagne glass began trembling so violently I thought she might drop it. For just a moment, our eyes met across the room, and I saw something I'd never seen in my daughter-in-law's face before. Pure, unadulterated panic. I need to check on the kitchen," Sarah stammered, practically fleeing the room. Several guests looked after her with concern, but I was focused entirely on my son. "Marcus," I said quietly, pulling him aside. "What monthly allowance? I set up those payments 3 years ago, but I've never received a single dollar." My son's face cycled through confusion, realization, and then something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "Dad, that's impossible. I've been approving those payments myself. $12,000 a month, just like you requested." "Show me," I said. 20 minutes later, we were locked in Marcus's home office while he pulled up the company's financial records on his computer. There it was, clear as day, a monthly payment of $12,000 authorized by Marcus Chen, paid from Chen Technologies accounts, to an account I'd never seen before. "This isn't my account number," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stared at the screen like it might change if he looked hard enough. "But Sarah said she'd set up the routing to your new account. She handles all our family finances now. She said you wanted it that way for tax purposes." That's when Sarah returned to the office, her makeup freshly applied, but her eyes red and puffy. She'd been crying. "There must be some banking error," she said quickly, her voice higher than usual. "Sometimes transfers get misrouted. I'll call our financial advisor first thing after the holidays and sort this out." But I'd been in business for 40 years, and I knew the difference between a banking error and a deliberate deception. And as I looked at my daughter-in-law's face, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. She wasn't surprised by this discovery. She was terrified of being caught. "Sarah, which account has been receiving these payments?" I'll have to check my records. Like I said, there's obviously been some kind of mistake." "For 3 years? The same mistake? Every month? For 3 years?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside the office, I could hear the party continuing. Laughter, music, the sound of people enjoying themselves, while my world crumbled around me. That night, as I lay awake in my own bed, the pieces began falling into place. The expensive jewelry, the constant home renovations, the luxury trips I thought Marcus was funding from his CEO salary. Sarah's designer clothes, her new car, the lavish lifestyle they'd been living while I scraped by on my savings. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stolen 3 years of my life, 3 years of financial security, 3 years during which I'd lived like a pauper while they lived like kings on my dime. But the money was just the beginning. As I would soon discover, Sarah's betrayal went deeper than I could have possibly imagined. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's panicked face and heard Marcus's confused stammering. By dawn, I was sitting in my home office surrounded by 3 years' worth of financial records that I'd barely glanced at since my retirement. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had feared. The monthly $12,000 wasn't the only money that had gone missing. My consulting fees from the company, payments that were supposed to compensate me for ongoing advisory work, had also been redirected. Instead of coming to my personal account, they've been going to something called Chen Family Asset Management, an entity I'd never heard of, but that Sarah had apparently created using forged documents bearing my signature. In total, over the course of 3 years, they'd stolen $547,000. More than $500,000 taken from me by my own family while I rationed my spending and worried about my dwindling savings. But Sarah wasn't done. As I dug deeper into the financial records, I discovered that she'd been even more creative than I'd given her credit for. Using her access to my personal information and her background in wealth management, she'd opened investment accounts in my name, then systematically drained them. She'd taken out lines of credit against my properties without my knowledge, using the money to fund their increasingly extravagant lifestyle. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a thief, she was a criminal mastermind. 2 days after Christmas, Sarah called me with what she claimed was an explanation. Her voice was saccharine sweet, the way people talk to children or the elderly when they think you can't understand complex concepts. "Robert, I've been thinking about our little mix-up the other night, and I believe I know what happened. With your recent memory issues, I think you might have forgotten about the investment strategy we discussed. The money has been going into a special account that I've been managing for your benefit, maximizing returns, minimizing tax liability. It's all perfectly legal and above board." Memory issues? I'd never had any memory issues in my life. My mind was as sharp as it had been at 40, maybe sharper. But I could see what she was doing, laying the groundwork for a different kind of theft. If she could convince people that I was suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, she could justify taking control of all my finances, not just the payments she'd already stolen. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I'd like to see the records of these investments, and I want to understand why you felt the need to create accounts without discussing it with me directly." Of course," she said, but I could hear the tension in her voice. "Though I have to say, Robert, Marcus and I have been worried about you lately. You seem confused about things we've discussed before. Maybe it would be helpful to have a doctor evaluate your situation." There it was. The gaslighting had begun in earnest. Over the next week, Sarah's campaign to discredit my mental health became increasingly aggressive. She called mutual friends, expressing concern about my memory. She scheduled a meeting with my personal physician, claiming that the family was worried about my cognitive function. She even went so far as to suggest to Marcus that they might need to pursue legal guardianship to protect me from myself. But Sarah had made one critical mistake. She'd assumed that because I was older, I was helpless. She'd forgotten that I'd built a multi-billion-dollar company by being smarter, more determined, and more ruthless than my competition. She was about to learn that retirement hadn't made me soft. It had just given me time to to plan. The turning point came during a family dinner at their house, exactly 1 week after the Christmas Eve revelation. Sarah had invited several family friends, ostensibly for a casual get-together, but I quickly realized it was actually a performance designed to showcase my supposed mental decline. Throughout the evening, she asked me questions about conversations I'd never had, referenced agreements I'd never made, and expressed concern when I couldn't remember things that had never happened. To the casual observer, it might have looked like a loving daughter-in-law caring for a confused elderly man. But I saw it for what it was, a calculated attempt to destroy my credibility so thoroughly that no one would believe me when I exposed her crimes. That night, as I sat in my car outside their mansion, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I wasn't just going to recover my stolen money. I was going to destroy Sarah Martinez so completely that she'd never be able to hurt another person again. After all, I'd built an empire by outthinking my competitors. Surely I could outwit one greedy woman who'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating me. The war had begun, and Sarah had no idea what she was up against. The first thing you learn when you build a company from nothing is that information is power. The second thing you learn is that money can buy you access to information that most people can't even imagine. And the third thing, the most important thing, is that patience and planning always defeat impulse and emotion. Sarah thought she was dealing with a confused old man whose best days were behind him. What she didn't realize was that she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 40 years learning how to destroy people who tried to cheat him. My first call was to Janet Morrison, the best forensic accountant in Seattle, and a woman who'd helped me expose corporate fraud more times than I could count. Janet was in her 50s, sharp as a razor, and had a particular hatred for people who preyed on the elderly. "Robert," she said when I outlined the situation, "this isn't just theft. What you're describing is elder abuse, wire fraud, identity theft, and probably a dozen other federal crimes. We're not just going to get your money back. We're going to put this woman in prison." Within 48 hours, Janet had assembled a team of investigators that would have made the FBI jealous. Computer forensics experts, private investigators, banking specialists, and lawyers who specialized in white-collar crime. The bill for their services would eventually top $200,000, but it was worth every penny for what we discovered. Sarah hadn't just stolen from me. She'd been running this exact same scam on elderly clients at her previous job, clients whose families had never realized what was happening until it was too late. We found evidence of at least 6 other victims, people who trusted her with their financial planning and ended up losing their life savings to her carefully orchestrated schemes. But the most damaging evidence came from Sarah herself. You see, criminals are often undone by their own arrogance, and Sarah was no exception. She'd kept detailed records of her theft, spreadsheets tracking how much she'd stolen, from which accounts, and how she'd covered her tracks. She'd even written emails to herself, apparently as a way of organizing her thoughts, describing her methods, and celebrating her success. In one particularly damning email, she'd written, "The old man is so trusting it's almost pathetic. As long as I keep Marcus confused and compliant, I can milk this for years. If Robert ever gets suspicious, I'll just play the dementia card. Who's going to believe a confused old man over a Harvard-educated financial planner?" Reading that email was like being punched in the gut. But it also crystallized my resolve. Sarah had made this personal, and now I was going to show her exactly what happened to people who mistook my kindness for weakness. The next phase of my plan required something I'd always been good at in business, playing a role. For the next month, I became the confused old man Sarah wanted me to be. I played along with her gaslighting, agreed to see doctors for memory evaluations, and even let her convince Marcus that I might need help managing my finances. But while Sarah thought she was winning, I was gathering evidence of every crime she'd ever committed. We installed hidden cameras in my home and in the common areas of Marcus's house, legal since I owned part of the property. We recorded phone conversations where Sarah admitted to managing my money without my knowledge. We documented every lie she told, every manipulation she attempted, every crime she committed. The breakthrough came when Sarah got greedy. Apparently convinced that she'd successfully gaslit everyone into believing I was mentally incompetent, she decided to accelerate her timeline. Instead of continuing to steal $12,000 a month, she began transferring larger amounts, $50,000 here, $75,000 there, from accounts she'd gained access to through forged power of attorney documents. But each new theft was evidence of new crimes, and each crime carried federal prison time. By mid-January, we had enough evidence to destroy Sarah's life 10 times over. Federal prosecutors were salivating at the chance to make an example of her. The FBI's white-collar crime unit had opened a formal investigation. Civil attorneys were preparing lawsuits that would leave her bankrupt for the rest of her life. But I wanted more than justice. I wanted to humiliate her the same way she'd tried to humiliate me. I wanted her to experience the same helplessness and betrayal that I had felt when I discovered her crimes. So I planned something special for New Year's Eve, a party that Sarah would never forget. New Year's Eve at Marcus and Sarah's house was always the social event of the season. The guest list included mayors, senators, business leaders, and the kind of people who could make or break reputations with a single conversation. Sarah loved being the hostess of these gatherings. It made her feel powerful and important. This year would be different. I arrived early, ostensibly to help with preparations, but actually to ensure my special guests could set up properly. The FBI agents were dressed as caterers. Nobody pays attention to serving staff at these kinds of events. The forensic accountant was pretending to be a family friend. The reporter from the Seattle Times was there as Marcus's college buddy. Sarah looked stunning in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, a dress purchased with money she'd stolen from me. She greeted me with that patronizing smile she'd perfected over the past month. "Robert, you look wonderful. How are you feeling? Any more of those memory episodes?" "I'm feeling clearer than I have in years," and I meant it. The party proceeded normally for the first few hours. Sarah played the perfect hostess, charming everyone with her wit and sophistication. Marcus mingled with the guests, proud of his wife, and completely unaware of the trap that was about to spring. At exactly 11:30, 30 minutes before midnight, I asked for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my champagne glass, "I'd like to make a toast before we welcome the new year. A toast to family, to trust, and to the importance of knowing who you can really count on." The crowd gathered around, expecting the kind of sentimental speech that rich old men give at parties. Sarah stood next to Marcus, beaming with pride, probably thinking that my confusion was making me overly emotional. Before I begin, I'd like to share something personal with all of you. You see, when I stepped down from my company 2 years ago, I thought I was leaving my legacy in good hands. I trusted my family completely, with my business, with my money, and with my reputation. But tonight, I want to tell you about what really happened when I put that trust in the wrong person. I nodded to Janet, who activated the large-screen television that dominated one wall of the living room. Instead of showing a football game or news program, it began displaying bank records, forged documents, and email correspondence, all evidence of Sarah's crime. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Gasps of shock, whispered conversations, and the unmistakable sound of 100 wealthy people realizing they were witnessing a scandal. These records show how my daughter-in-law has been systematically stealing from me for 3 years, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. $547,000, taken from an elderly man by someone he trusted completely. Sarah's face had gone white as a sheet, but she tried to maintain her composure. Robert, you're confused again. We've discussed this. Have we? I interrupted. Let's listen to what you really think about our discussions. The speakers crackled to life with a recording of Sarah's voice. The old man is so trusting it's almost pathetic. As long as I keep Marcus confused and compliant, I can milk this for years. The effect was electric. Several guests actually stepped away from Sarah, as if she had become physically dangerous. Marcus looked like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. But I wasn't finished. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet some additional guests tonight. Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and Detective Michael Rodriguez from the Seattle Police Department. The two caterers stepped forward, displaying their badges. Agent Walsh's voice was professional but cold as she addressed Sarah directly. Sarah Martinez, you're under arrest for wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. What happened next was chaos. Sarah began screaming that this was all a misunderstanding, that I was confused, that the evidence was fabricated. Several guests began filming with their phones. By morning, videos of her arrest would be all over social media. Marcus stood frozen, watching his wife being handcuffed, while trying to process the magnitude of her betrayal. When he finally found his voice, all he could do was whisper, "Sarah, how could you?" But the legal consequences were just the beginning. Within hours, news of Sarah's arrest was trending on social media. By morning, it was front-page news in every major newspaper in the Pacific Northwest. The business community that had embraced her as Marcus Chen's sophisticated wife now knew her as a common criminal who preyed on elderly people. The civil lawsuits began immediately, not just from me, but from the 6 other elderly victims my investigation had uncovered. Sarah's assets were frozen, her accounts seized, and her passport confiscated. The luxury lifestyle she'd built on stolen money evaporated overnight. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when Sarah called me from jail. "Robert," she said, her voice small and defeated, "I know you have every right to hate me, but I'm begging you to help me. The other inmates, they don't like people who hurt old people. I'm not safe here." "Sarah," I replied, "I want you to remember this conversation for the next 8 to 10 years while you're in federal prison. Remember that you called a confused old man with memory problems and asked him to save you." Then I hung up and never spoke to her again. Sarah Martinez was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $547,000 plus damages totaling over $1.2 million. The judge, a woman in her 70s herself, was particularly harsh in her sentencing, noting that crimes against elderly people strike at the heart of family trust and social stability. Sarah's conviction also led to the prosecution of her accomplices at the wealth management firm where she'd previously worked. 3 other employees were convicted of similar crimes, and the company was forced to pay millions in restitution to victims' families. But the most complex part of this entire ordeal was rebuilding my relationship with Marcus. My son was devastated, not just by his wife's betrayal, but by his own role in enabling it. He'd signed the documents that allowed the theft to happen, even if he didn't understand what he was authorizing. More importantly, he'd chosen to believe Sarah's lies about my mental health rather than trusting his own father. The board of directors at Chen Technologies voted to remove Marcus as CEO, at least temporarily, while they investigated whether he'd been complicit in the crimes. Although the investigation eventually cleared him of any intentional wrongdoing, the scandal had damaged his reputation and leadership credibility. For months after Sarah's arrest, Marcus and I barely spoke. He was drowning in guilt and shame, while I was struggling to forgive not just Sarah's crimes, but my son's willingness to believe I was losing my mind, rather than consider that his wife might be lying. The turning point came 6 months after the trial, when Marcus showed up at my house with a bottle of wine and a folder of documents. "Dad," he said, "I want to show you what I've been doing." Inside the folder were plans for a new division of Chen Technologies, a cybersecurity unit focused specifically on protecting elderly people from financial fraud. Marcus had spent months researching the problem, consulting with experts, and developing technology that could prevent the kind of crimes Sarah had committed. "I can't undo what happened," he said, his eyes filling with tears. "I can't give you back the 3 years of worry and stress, but I can make sure this never happens to anyone else." That's when I knew my son was truly sorry, not just for what had happened, but for his part in allowing it to happen. Today, Marcus is back to running Chen Technologies, and our new Elder Guard division has prevented millions of dollars in fraud against senior citizens. We've testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections for elderly Americans, and our technology is being used by banks and financial institutions across the country. But more importantly, Marcus and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than blind trust. We still love each other, but we also verify everything. It's a lesson I wish I hadn't needed to learn the hard way. As for Sarah, she's currently serving her sentence at a federal facility in California. According to mutual acquaintances, she spent her time in prison writing letters to various family members, claiming that she's found God and deeply regrets her actions. Several people have suggested that I might want to forgive her, to let go of my anger for my own peace of mind. But here's what those well-meaning people don't understand. I'm not angry anymore. Anger is what you feel when you're powerless to change a situation. What I feel now is satisfaction, the deep, lasting satisfaction that comes from knowing that justice was served and that other people have been protected from experiencing what I went through. Sarah didn't just steal money from me. She tried to steal my dignity, my mental competence, and my relationship with my son. She wanted to turn me into a helpless victim while she lived like a queen on money I'd earned through decades of hard work. Instead, she learned that underestimating people is the most expensive mistake you can make. The Christmas season will always hold complicated memories for me now. It was during Christmas that I discovered my family's betrayal, but it was also during Christmas that I learned I was stronger and more resourceful than I'd ever imagined. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most painful experiences. My advice to anyone listening to this story is simple. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, investigate. If people are trying to convince you that your memory or judgment is failing, get a second opinion. And if someone is stealing from you, whether it's money, dignity, or peace of mind, don't just get mad, get even. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to show them that there are consequences for betrayal. And sometimes the most important lesson you can teach is that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Now, if you enjoyed this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, wait until you hear what happened when Marcus's business partner tried to steal the company while we were dealing with Sarah's crimes. That's a story involving corporate espionage, international money laundering, and a revenge plot that made Sarah's downfall look like a practice round. But that's a story for another day. Until then, remember, blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and sometimes the greatest revenge is simply the truth.